Here at the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management, located at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus, we meet the needs of the upwardly mobile professionals. Our business school functions in an evolving global space where the need to have that competitive edge distinguishes you as a professional. Our academic curriculum offers a variety of programs that gives you that edge. We offer our students a doctorate in business administration. Then, there's our executive masters in business administration. Our Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management is for you. Enroll now.
All right, so good evening and welcome. So let me thank you for joining us in this, our first edition of this quarterly Caribbean Investment Report. I am Professor Justin Robinson and I will be your presenter. And our objective here really is, as a business school, to bring some information on the private sector and how it's performing and investments across the region. Because there's a way in which we get information about the overall economy. There are central banks, the IDB, IMF, and a number of other players that are providing macroeconomic type information. And what we are planning to do through this is to bring some information on the private sector, on Caribbean companies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a PowerPoint with the report. Persons wanting to get the full report, that will also be available from our team, so you can email us. If you just message them, we can email you with the full report. So I'm going to quickly get into the PowerPoint and take you through that. Okay, so first up, just to give you a sense of the universe that we are looking at, the investments we are looking at. So right now across CARICOM, there are 6 stock exchanges: Bahamas, Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. And we have 3 companies that, and I'm using the sector guidance or sector coding from the Jamaica Stock Exchange, which is by, as you will see, which by a long way is our dominant market. So we have 3 companies in the communication sector. We have 4 that are conglomerates. So they are in a range of businesses, Massey, Goddard's, that type of entity. We have 5 that are in energy. The stock markets are dominated by finance companies, banks, insurance, non-bank. We have 60 listings in finance, 33 in manufacturing, 10 in the property area, 22 retail and distribution, 4 in tourism, 8 utilities, and 23 are other, a range of companies. We also have 39 preference shares being offered. So in all, there are like 211 equity issues that we are tracking: 27 in the Bahamas, 9 in Barbados, 13 in the Eastern Caribbean, 13 in Guyana, 125 in Jamaica, and 24 in Trinidad. So again, the Jamaican stock market by a long way having the most investments and instruments traded on that exchange. And in terms of companies' corporate bonds, on the exchanges, we're able to follow 2 from the Bahamas, 1 from Barbados, 11 on the EC, 4 from Jamaica, and 3 from Trinidad and Tobago. So Q1, what was the action like? So Q1, January 4th, 2021 to March 31st. So we had 1.2 billion shares trading across the 6 exchanges for the quarter. Just a 1.2 billion shares would have traded, securities traded on the 6 exchanges. For the quarter, 74 of them, or 34.5%, posted gains. 104 or 49, almost half, were declining, and 31 or 15% were unchanged. So it wasn't a wonderful quarter across the region for the instruments being traded on the exchanges. Wigton Wind Farm Limited out of Jamaica was the volume leader, with 212,863,000 shares being traded. And again, as you can see, in terms of volume of trading, Jamaica was quite dominant. Derrimon Trading, Trans Jamaica Highway, Pulse Investments Jamaica, and RJR Network Jamaica. These were our 5 most actively traded investments on the stock exchanges across the region for the first quarter of 2021. So again, to put this in context, now the heart of what I do at the business school with this area, I guess it's data that I use a lot in my own research, is the creation of these these indices. So if you follow investments, you've heard about the Standard & Poor's 500 for the UK, for the US, sorry, or the Dow. In England, the FTSE 100, that's it. So what I've created and what I track are some indices tracking the stocks and the investments across the region. So one, I have the CASX, the Caribbean All Share Index, which tracks all of the common and preferred shares traded across the 6 exchanges. And I also have what I call a CSX 30, which is an index which tracks the 30 most important stocks across the region. Now, in creating this, given that we are starting this, I would have constructed the index to start at an arbitrary value of 1,000. So the performance is being tracked from that baseline of 1,000. So at the end of Q1, March 31st this year, the market value of all of the investments on the stock exchanges was $32.1 billion US. So not an insignificant amount. So when we look at the number of investments multiplied by their market price on the stock exchanges, they were worth 32.1 billion. Of course, that's quite small compared globally, where at the end of March, the S&P 500 shares were 33.49 trillion US. The FTSE 100, 2.5 trillion, but still not 32 billion is not an insignificant sum of money invested. The index would have ended the quarter at 999.2. So it would have fallen by 0.8. So a decline of 0.8%. And this was the volume traded, which you've seen before. And in terms of the volatility or the risk, I also construct a volatility index, which was worked out at 0.66. Now, in terms of the 30 most influential stocks in the region, that index closed at 997.1, down 2.9 points, or a loss of 0.29%. So the CSX 30 in a way is something of a model portfolio. So I don't want you to judge me too harshly on the performance of the model portfolio on the first iteration and the volatility. Now, compared regionally, the regional markets continue to struggle, whereas we're seeing a rebound continue globally. So the S&P 500 was up 5.8% for the quarter. The FTSE in the UK up 3.9%, whereas our markets were down. However, one of the benefits of our markets to some extent is the stability. So if you look at the volatility index, our markets are rather less volatile than globally. So you're not generating as high returns, but your investments are more stable. And these should really be I guess in the report, I refer to them as declines. So the regional numbers should really be negative. These are declines. And we just have a little visual of that, where we have gains on the UK broad market, the US broad market, but we have the declines in our market, slight declines for the quarter. So what were the 5 biggest movers across the region? So the biggest mover was Siboney, coming out of Jamaica, a stock in the tourism sector, where that share price really doubled for the quarter, up 128.7%. So you would have doubled your money in that quarter, and that's a decent amount of volume being traded. We also had Salada Foods out of Jamaica, manufacturing sector. Again, massive increase for the quarter, 117.63%. So again, those investors are smiling and decent volume. 70% increase in the price of Barbados farms in Barbados, but relatively low volumes traded there. Jamaica Teas from the manufacturing sector in Jamaica, a 56% increase on quite good volume as well. And Indies, a retail stock in Jamaica, giving a gain of 46.8%. So again, and these returns, as detailed, these are all measured in US dollars. So we are taking the local price, adjusting for the foreign exchange. So everything here is in US dollars. The biggest declines for the quarter, again, they all come out of Jamaica. Palace Amusements down 51.7%, relatively small volume. MTLJ Jamaica down 28%, CAC, PGX, and KEX all down 20%, and on decent volume. So these are our 5 biggest decliners for the quarter under consideration. Now, as part of the project, what we also provide you are some indices that track sectors. So you have, those were the overall markets. So we have the CFSX, which is the Financial Services Index. So it tracks the companies in the financial services sector. We have CARICOM. This is the Communications, Energy, and Utilities Index. So sometimes I end up putting some stuff together so that you have a decent number of companies. The CMSX tracks companies in the manufacturing sector. And you have tourism, retail, distribution, and property is another group. And then we have the CPSX, which tracks the preferred shares. So again, to repeat, CFSX, companies, investments in the financial services sector. CCEUX, which captures communications, energy, and utility company investments. CMFX, manufacturing investments. CTRDX, tourism, retail, distribution, and then the preferred shares index. In general, as you saw, most of the sectors were down. Financial companies, that index started at 1,000, would have ended at 977.9, down 22 points, or 2.2%. Communication, energy, utilities, down 61 points, so 6.2% loss. Manufacturing companies down 48.4, 4.8% loss, 4.8% decline. And the winners, the strongest sectors were tourism, retail, distribution. So again, you saw earlier, Siboney would be in there, which would have pulled this index up quite a bit. So that index was up 68.1 points, gain of 6.81%. And the preferred shares index was really the strongest, up 189.1 points, 18.91% return. However, a lot of those gains were in some preferred shares for Jamaica money market brokers. They have a number of preferred shares on offer. And most of the gains were in that group of companies with most of the other preferreds pretty much holding their own and holding steady. The financials, again, most of these stocks were down. Similarly with the utilities and the manufacturing. In the tourism area, that was really boosted quite a bit by the performance of Siboney, which really would have doubled its share price over the period. So again, just to give you a sense of the performance within that. So in terms of the CSX 30, which are the 30 most influential stocks, these were our big performers. Siboney, Grace Kennedy up 36.1%. So that's out of Jamaica. Guardian Holdings out of Trinidad up 22.8%. TCL out of Trinidad up 19.9%. And Carreras out of Jamaica also up 17%. So these were the 5 biggest gainers in the CSX 30. Among the manufacturing companies tracked by the CMSX index, Jamaica Teas was the strongest performer with a 56% gain. CFF out of Jamaica up 37.3%. That's Caribbean fragrances. So I think the ladies might be interested in that. Caribbean Producers Group up 31.3%. AMG Packaging up 28.1%. And Creamy, which does pastries and stuff, up 17.2%. Again, those being the biggest gainers in the manufacturing sector. Among the financials, BFH out of Bahamas was posting a 57.6% increase. Guardian the Guardian up 22.8%. First Rock out of Jamaica up 20.1%. Epley out of Jamaica up 19.9%. ISP out of Jamaica up 18.8%. And QWI again out of Jamaica also up. So these would have been, and I think I have, for some reason, I have 6 here. So I normally have 5. So these were our 6 biggest gainers in the financial services sector. Among the tourism, retail, distribution, our 5 biggest gainers, Siboney, you saw already, up 128.7%. Indies in the retail sector, 46.8%. Lumber out of Jamaica, 45.7% increase. PBS out of Jamaica, a 45.6% increase. And also Grace Kennedy up 36.1%. So again, investors would have, so while we saw overall market looking weak, in particular, certain investors certainly had an extremely profitable quarter, and again, measured in US dollars. In terms of dividends being declared for the quarter, and I hope my table here is readable. So quite a few dividends. And these dividends are in the domestic currency. So Demerara Tobacco Company declaring a 1660 Guyanese dollar dividend. Sterling Products, a $6 dividend. Ansa McCall out of Trinidad. So then these are dividends that were declared during this quarter. And we have quite a number of companies actually declaring a dividend over the course of the quarter. Sagicor, Jamaica, Epley out of Jamaica, Barita Investments, and Commercial Bank, Emera Depository, the Depository Receipts, Scotiabank Trinidad, Grace Kennedy, Sagicor Jamaica, seem to have had a couple of payments there. First Citizens out of Trinidad, Kingston Wharfs, Seprod, Jamaica Boilers Group, Supreme Ventures Limited, Wabisco in Barbados, Carreras, Jamaica Producer, I think this is Jamaica, Epley, 8.25% preferred, the Jamaica Stock Exchange itself, JSD, that's an insurance company out of Bahamas, Indies, Pan Jamaica Investments, Access Financial Services out of Jamaica, Wisynco out of Jamaica, Cargo Handlers, Honey Bun, Stanley Motor Limited, again, all out of Jamaica, LJ Williams out of Trinidad, Lab out of Jamaica, Doctors Health Service from Bahamas, LJ Williams A and B out of Trinidad, Mail Pack out of Jamaica, National Gas Company Limited, Trinidad, Guardian Media Limited, Epley, they're 8.75 preferred shares. And we have some JMMB preferred shares as well as Jamaica Public Services with some preferred shares, Pulse and CBL out of the Bahamas. And companies vary quite a bit as to whether when they pay their dividend or when they declare it. Some pay on a schedule. It depends on their year end and so on. And to close out my presentation as I round up the markets for the quarter, we look at some regional government debt, money borrowed for the quarter. So the Antiguan government would have borrowed about 56.8 million EC on the government securities market on the OECS, paying an average interest rate of 3.86%. The Dominican government would have raised 20 million at a rate of about average 1.4. St. Lucian government about 65 million at a rate of average rate of 3.5. St. Vincent and the Grenadines 56 million at an average rate of 1.5. Barbados, I guess with the debt restructuring in Barbados, we haven't had new government debt being issued regionally. I guess Barbados' borrowing would be with the multilateral. So here I'm tracking money raised locally or regionally. Guyana would have seen, we got the government raised about 15 billion Guyanese dollars at an average rate of 1.1. Jamaica, 6.6 billion, rate of 1.4. In Trinidad and Tobago, about 2 billion at an average rate of about 0.33%. And I usually close out with what I call a little investing school or tip for the week. So what we talk about for the quarter. So when we look at these stock prices, one of the things that people think about is the idea of a support level versus a resistance level. So a support level is a price level where the price of a falling stock tends to find support. So this means that the price of the stock is likely to either stabilize or rebound from this level rather than fall any further. So quite often when we look at the history of a stock, you find that a stock doesn't really trade below a certain price. So when the price gets to that level, we kind of expect support that it's going to stabilize there or rebound. However, when you see a stock fall below this level and there's some strong volume, it's likely that it's going to keep falling to new lows until it finds some new support level. So support level is where we think when a stock is coming down, where is it going to stop? What's the kind of bottom? What's the flow? And there tends to be like a historical flow where it doesn't tend to fall below. So as it begins to get there, we expect it to stabilize or rebound. But if it goes through that flow, then you uncharted waters. Similarly, on the upside, what we call a resistance level, a ceiling or a cap. So the price level where the price of a rising stock tends to find resistance. historically, the stock has never really broken through and held up above this level. So when it begins to hit there, it's likely to either stabilize or fall from this level rather than continue rising. If the stock rises above that and on strong volumes, then it seems like it's into a new high until it finds a new resistance level. And quite often what people do is they kind of build trend lines of the stock price. If a stock price is moving between the support and the resistance levels, then a basic investment strategy is to buy at the support because you expect it to rebound, and sell at the resistance because you expect it to fall from there. All right, so thank you for watching the presentation, and I'm now open to any of your questions. Thanks. Don't all ask at once. Okay, so dividends seem rather weak on the surface. What would I say? Okay, so what I would say in terms of the dividends, and maybe let me just put that back up. Okay, so these are dividends per share. So depending on the amount of shares you have, it could be a decent amount of money. Okay, so again, so these are dividends per share. Also, this is, for many of these companies, this is not likely to be the only dividend for the year. Okay, so some companies will pay one dividend for a year, but that's not the norm. You either see dividends maybe twice a year or every quarter. So I don't think they are as weak as they appear on the surface because they're really dividends per share that you own. They're not likely the only dividend for the year. But I think what I would also want to say is that in many cases, when persons are investing, the bulk of your capital gains are the appreciation of the share price. The dividends tend to be the much smaller part of your returns, and the bulk of your returns are really going to come from the capital appreciation. Okay, so I see there was a question there from Sean. What is my view of the overall quarter? So the quarter shows that the markets were essentially flat across the region, but the amount of stocks declining or stable exceeded the ones that showed growth. So again, if we go back to the sort of intro, so you want to think that 104 plus 31 of the stocks were either declining or unchanged. So they point to quite a weak quarter, which shows that COVID-19 is impacting, one, the performance of the companies, which underlies the trading, and also impacting the wealth of investors, which also impact on trading. So again, my response is that it shows a quite weak quarter with the stocks being either majority declining or being flat, showing that the economy and by extension, the companies and investors across the region continue to be plagued by the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you compare that to what's happening globally, where you see the market in positive territory, green for the US S&P 500, and in the UK also. where do you see the markets going in quarter two? Okay, so in quarter two, I would expect, prediction is always dangerous, but quarter two, I would expect to see a strengthening of the market as the lockdowns continue to ease across the region and commercial activity picks up. But I think a lot will depend on the control of the virus and the speed with which we are able to vaccinate people. Because a lot of our economies are externally driven, and I think the extent to which the commerce comes back, for one of better words, we get back to normal, will depend on the control of the virus as well, and linked to that is vaccination. But I would expect improvements in quarter two as lockdowns ease and commercial activity picks up. I have another question here. What is the best way? How does one start investing in the stock market? And I would say what I would advise, the simplest way I think for people to dip their feet in investing is to invest in a mutual fund. And I don't know what country you're in, but if you are in Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, that there are a number of mutual funds, because with the mutual funds, you can get in with a relatively small amount of money. Okay, so you don't need a large amount of funds to actually do that investing. And you immediately get some diversification. Okay, so in terms of getting started, I would advise that person, the simplest way to get started is to do it through a mutual fund type investment. Okay, what is the reason for Siboney's success? Yeah, that's always a good, I mean, that's a good question. So this company would have seen significant improvement over the course of the year. So let me just pull up some data there that I have on that company. The company's share price rose from 22 cents US to 52 cents over the period. So that's quite a significant and dramatic increase in the stock there. And the success seems to be that the company has continued to perform well at the level of profits through the pandemic, and investors seem to have some confidence for improved growth going forward. Now, beginning in and what the school will be bringing is another set of indices. It will be a different presentation, a different set of webinars where we would look at the financial performance of the Caribbean companies on a quarterly basis. So again, you would want to look out for that, where we would, because the companies on these exchanges are required to file quarterly financial statements. So March would have just ended, so many are just filing. So sometime maybe in May or April, sometime in May, we would do a webinar on the actual Q1 profitability. Michael Green is asking if you could look at mutual fund performance, and that's certainly something I can add. So thanks for that, because that's one of the things I wanted to get from people. What are some of the other things they would like to see us have in the report? So I can certainly include a tracking of the mutual fund performance. We have a question here. Do I think there will be inflationary pressure? I don't expect pressure from inflation because the underlying economies are so weak that there's been such large declines in GDP. So I don't see that improvement in the economy and what I expect in the stock market to drive inflation. So I have a question here from, what is the likely fiscal impact on the Caribbean businesses since President Biden's recent announcement of increases in taxation on the high-end earners to support the $2 billion infrastructure project onwards? Okay, so what do I think is the potential impact here? Okay, so one possible potential positive impact is that many Caribbean countries, Barbados, Eastern Caribbean, we have an international business sector which does provide high net worth individuals with means of managing their tax liability. And there may be an increase in the demand for global tax management services in the face of this increase in taxation, which would be a positive for our economies as persons try to minimize their own tax liability. On the other hand, I mean, I don't really expect much of an impact outside that. These persons being targeted here are quite wealthy, and I don't expect that these increased taxes are going to push them into anything vaguely resembling poverty, that they're likely to be spending less. And have I covered everything in the Q&A? Anything in the chat? I'm looking at the chat now. So someone is asking, why would you say Jamaica dominates the market? Do you think it's down there to their size, or there being a better understanding of investment options in the market? So I think that's a very good question. So one of the things that has happened in the region in the last decade has really, or maybe more, has really been the dramatic growth and development of the financial sector in Jamaica. And one of the examples of that is the Jamaica Stock Exchange. The Jamaica Stock Exchange has actually been one of the, there have been a couple of years in the last 20 years when the Jamaica stock market was the best performing stock market in the world. So they now have a very large, sophisticated development. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One, there's a very thriving junior stock market in Jamaica because there are significant tax benefits for listing on the Jamaica stock, on the junior market in Jamaica, and many companies have taken advantage of the tax benefits. So there's been a dramatic growth there. I think secondly, there is the regulatory framework. Jamaica's regulatory framework in terms of the financial services sector, I would say, is significantly ahead of the region. Thirdly, as you say, their size, they are the biggest economy in the English-speaking Caribbean. And I would say fourthly, their macroeconomic stability. I think as part, the Jamaica has had a pretty successful IMF program over the last decade, which has given a lot of stability in terms of the macroeconomic stability in Jamaica. And they have done a lot of reforms in terms of governance and the environment, which I think has created a stable foundation for investments. So those would be the reasons why I would say that Jamaica is the dominant market. I think one, the growth in the junior stock market because of the tax incentives there, the sophistication of the regulatory environment, the macroeconomic stability coming out of the successful IMF program, and the sheer size and diversity of Jamaica relative to others. So I want to say, would you say now is a good time to invest in the market due to the weak environment? Yes, I would say now, I would say this is a buyer's market. I think now would be a good time to get in. A number of stocks are declining. They are trading close to their support levels. So I would say now is as good a time as any. And I think I kind of answered what is Jamaica doing right, and what lessons are there for other stock markets in the Caribbean, especially Barbados. What I would say, one interesting that happened in Jamaica is that a large number of medium-sized enterprises have gone public on the junior stock market in Jamaica. Many would say that a lot of that has been driven by the tax incentives, but there's also an opportunity for some of these entrepreneurs to bring in new capital to grow their business. I think what the Jamaica example shows is that having the macroeconomic stability, the strong regulatory environment, and fiscal incentives for companies to list on the exchange can go a long way towards boosting the activity on the stock market. So we have a minimum wage question. Minimum wage implementation will. Okay, so Barbados is implementing a minimum wage. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really an expert on how minimum wages feed through the economy, so I think I might want to take a pass on that one. That's not really, that's kind of labor market stuff that's a little bit outside of my expertise. Do you see President Biden's infrastructure bill spurring on growth in the region's manufacturing companies and companies that specialize in steels, metals, and infrastructure parts? Okay, so the US is a large economy right next door to us. So President Biden's stimulus infrastructure bill, to the extent that that is successful in driving strong growth in the US, it is difficult to see that that would not have a positive knock-on effect on our companies and on our economies and the companies, and by extension, what we see on the stock markets. And certainly Caribbean companies that can become part of the supply chain for companies capitalizing on the expected infrastructure boom in the Caribbean. I would certainly see that as a positive. So I would see a boom in the US as a positive for the region generally. And companies that are part of the supply chain in infrastructure, greening, a lot of the areas that are targeted certainly can get a boon from that anticipated expansion in the US. We're getting couple of questions about why is Barbados not doing as well on the stock market side as compared to Jamaica. And that's not an easy question to answer. I mean, one obvious factor is size. Barbados is a much smaller economy than Jamaica. The companies here are a lot smaller, so that is one factor. Barbados did go through a period of significant macroeconomic instability, which again would have been a negative. And also the other issue might very well be around the structure and culture of the Barbados economy. So there are vibrant companies, there are investors doing well in Barbados, but a number of them have chosen not to go the public equity, the public market, stock markets route. So when you think of the big investors, the big businesses in Barbados, the Williams Group, Jada, a couple of others come to mind. They really haven't gone the route of the public equity markets, which is an interesting question. And clearly they view I guess I tend to trust the knowledge and expertise of the entrepreneurs themselves. So when they look at the cost benefit trade-off, the public equity markets, they don't see as the optimal means of growing their businesses. Exactly what is behind that would certainly be an interesting question to probe. Do you think there needs to be greater investment education for the public in Barbados to spur interest in stock market and investing? Yes, I think so. And this is part of what we are trying to do with a webinar like this, just to really let people know what is there in your own backyard. So again, I hope from the presentation that persons would have seen that there are companies in the Caribbean, right across Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, Eastern Caribbean, that are generating decent rates of returns measured in US dollars. So part of our role as a business school and a university, what we're trying to do, which is why we are starting this project, which we're going to stick with and try to do this presentation quarterly. So to put this information in front of people. Now, one of the interesting questions which we might have when we do this webinar for the second quarter is, what are the impediments to moving money across the region? So if you were watching this and you got excited by the returns in Siboney and you wanted to put some money in there, how easy it is for you to do that? You know, what are the currency, regulatory, tax implications of that? And we will probe that aspect a little more when we do the Q2 edition. But certainly a much greater role for public education, and we are trying to do our little bit with webinars like this. Why hasn't Barbados implemented a similar model strategy to Jamaica in terms of incentives to spur growth? Again, fair question. Barbados did around 2012 or so implement a set of fiscal incentives for companies to list on the junior stock market that were very similar. They were clearly modeled on what Jamaica had done. It didn't seem to bring a lot of activity in from the companies. And as the Barbados tried to deal with its fiscal issues, a number of those incentives were eliminated. Now, Barbados' opportunity to offer those incentives may be quite different now because Barbados has a pretty low corporation tax rate anyway. So you're not gonna, so the way you can save on corporation tax by listing on the junior market in Jamaica, the options for that aren't really here now because our corporation tax rate is already so low. I think the question we might want to address in Barbados might be two. Are Barbadian investors interested in equity investments in a major way? And if so, why or why not? So that's on the demand side. And on the supply side, the interests of Barbadian companies in terms of using the public equity markets as part of their strategy. But one thing that we want to encourage you to do as an investor, potential investor, is to think of it as a region. You know, even though you're in Barbados and there isn't much action here, there is a lot of action in Jamaica, Trinidad, and other places where you can put your money. You know, in a sense, there's some broader questions which are a little more controversial in a way. Can the region really support 6 active markets? So should we be thinking of having maybe, I mean, should really the object, should we be looking at some sort of more integrated regional markets? Because I mean, can we really support 6 active markets? And I think so that's a question really. Do you think it's prudent regionally in having 3 exchanges the small size? Again, that's an issue. So some of the inactivity in the other markets really is how sustainable is having 6 markets. So in a way, you could argue, I mean, sometimes I argue it, that we already have a regional stock exchange. It's called the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Many of the companies, so when you look at it, most of the regional companies are in fact listed. The major regional players are listed in Jamaica. So again, if I just put back up my slide here, giving you the sort of regional overview. The other markets are really quite small. Huh? There are only 9 unique companies listed in Barbados. There are 13 unique companies listed in the EC, 13 in Jamaica, and even on Trinidad, there are 24. So we already, in a way, have a regional stock exchange in the form of the Jamaica Stock Exchange, where most of the big regional players are already listed. Okay, so I think I've sort of exhausted most of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat or online. One of the things I would like to hear from participants, if there's anything they would like to see us add to the report. So we had one for the mutual funds. Anything else persons would like to see added to the report to make it a little more interesting, appealing, user-friendly? And we would like to create a mailing list of persons who we can send the report out to each quarter. So again, if you would have the report, and we could make, I would do a brief PowerPoint each time. We could have more of a discussion going forward. Okay, so we don't seem to have any further suggestions, questions. So again, I would want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for tuning in. This is a project that we are quite committed to trying to keeping and sustaining as we try to bring you more information on what's happening with the private sector. You tend to have a lot of public sector information. I'm hoping you can join us. I think it's next week, Pamela, when we would be, when I would have as a guest Professor Avinash Prasad, who is the chairman,
next Thursday,
yes, of the Caribbean Commission on the Private Sector, really a CARICOM report on how to drive the private sector forward. So again, thanks for your time, and have a great evening, and look forward to seeing you when we do our Q2 edition. We are targeting the first Wednesday in July. And that's really our target. So again, thanks. Have a great evening and have a profitable quarter. Take care.